Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Milliot, editor-at-large at Publishers Weekly and former editorial director of the magazine. And it's my great honor to award the BookFest Honorary Achievement Award this year to Mark Coker, who I think almost needs no introduction to this crew. Mark is the founder of Smashwords and has been involved in the independent publishing industry for many years, maybe longer than we all want to think. With him and I are thinking it's at least 20 years or so. I first met Mark about 20 years ago when he came into the Publishers Weekly office to pitch a story about this company that I had barely heard of. And we spent, I would say, a good hour or so going over the finer points of what self-publishing could do and what his idea for Smashwords was. And, he really made a very sound case of, what the future was going to be, as it turns out. And ever since then, we followed the development of Smashwords very closely. In a conversation before this presentation, we have been talking about how much we had seen each other at different conferences, let's say. If anybody was an evangelist for self-publishing, I definitely think you'd have to put Mark high up on the list, because you could tell right from the beginning, he generally felt passionate about what he was doing. And we had a lot of discussions about what self-publishing used to be like. For those who may not be old enough to remember, before digital technology came along, you were really reduced to relying on print books that you would have to pay literally tens and thousands of dollars for, and that you really had no distribution for, and which nobody really cared that much about. And it was not the most prestigious or well looked upon business. So getting into the whole operation, Mark, I think, identified some of these things that he knew had to be corrected. And with the dawn of digital publishing, he was the right guy in the right place with Smashwords. It handled a lot of things that previously somebody who wanted to be a self-publisher couldn't do, or even a small independent publisher couldn't do. Hard to get press time, hard to get the attention of readers, virtually impossible to get distribution. You put all that together and you had quite a mountain to climb. And it was, Mark and others like him that really began, spreading the word of independent publishing and what it really held, the possibilities it held for the future. And some of that could be found in a statistic I just looked up a couple of days ago on a story I wrote last year about Bowker and its numbers. And it's found that in 2023, there were 2.6 million self-published titles released that year. And there are about 426,000 traditional published titles released. So I think that shows you, almost in a nutshell, how much self-publishing and independent publishing has evolved. And it's really, I think, really terrifically appropriate that it comes at this time that Mark is honored, because we've written some stories, some of you hopefully have read about in Publishers Weekly and PW Daily, about the changes that traditional publishers are ongoing, how traditional powerhouse publishers such as Madeline McIntosh has left to found Authors Equity, and Zandu has been founded by a veteran of Random House as well. And these publishers are really embracing what independent and self-publishing can do, and what you don't, and how the old traditional publishing model is basically, if not broken, suffering some cuts. During one of these stories, we talked about to an author who pointed out we're in an author-centric era now. In the old days, when you really depended on publishers to do everything for you if you were an author, from paying you an advance to editing manuscripts to distributing it keyly. Those things have all sort of been taken over by processes that independent publishers can do using such tools as Smashwords and the draft to digital combination. So it really has been, quite a dramatic change over the last 20 years. And Mark, I was kind of wondering what your thoughts, and do you think you'd ever get this far?
Well, first of all, I'm really honored, and Jim, I'm honored that you're presenting this. I feel like you're part of the story of the indie movement. I have such fond memories of our first meeting, walking into your office, seeing your desk that looked just like my desk.
My desk is a landmark.
Well, it organized in 3 dimensions, right. But it was organized. I never imagined, I had a dream. I had a crazy idea. I wanted to disrupt traditional publishing. I wanted to democratize it. I wanted to make it accessible to every writer in the world at no cost. I wanted to empower readers to read what they want, not just what publishers and agents tell them they can read. So, that was the original vision of just democratizing publishing, putting the power into the hands of authors. I never really imagined it would become so transformative for so many people. I had no idea the obstacles that we were going to run into. That day that you and I met in your office, and it must have been close to an hour and a half, that you were so generous with your time. Some kid from Silicon Valley with dreams, who knew nothing about publishing other than what it felt like to be a rejected author.
Right.
And so it is gratifying to see what's happened. I started the company, from the basis of just believing in authors, believing in writers. I had faith that, locked between the brains and the fingertips of all these writers, there would be future classics. And, I just felt like if we could make it possible for any writer anywhere in the world to professionally publish an ebook, that some of those authors would go on to become future bestsellers, future classics. But I didn't really understand the obstacles that we were running against. So, at the time when we launched Smashwords in 2008, there was a tremendous stigma around self-publishing, and that stigma was probably strongest among the writing community. Writers at the time could be vicious to one another. When one writer kind of stepped out of the fold and said, I want to self-publish, they were attacked by fellow writers who believed that only publishers had the divine wisdom to determine when a writer was ready to graduate to become a published author. And the conventional wisdom at the time was that you just keep working hard, keep taking those rejections, keep getting better. And when you're finally good enough, the publishers will let you into the system. And I thought that was just all hogwash. Keep in mind that at the time, I started working on the business plan in 2005. We launched in 2008. At the time, and we were going to launch a business.
Mark, for just a second, because we have to talk about Amazon before our time runs out. Because, I remember, Amazon was really starting to roll, and how determined you were to give authors alternatives to what Kindle and Amazon were creating, and how you wanted to be fair and ethical. Not saying that Amazon isn't any of those things, but you really wanted authors to be able to do their own thing and to really benefit from all the rewards, from all their hard work, and not kind of get caught up in this gigantic system where you had to follow Amazon's rules.
Right. I believed in freedom. I thought about, what are the best things about a traditional publisher? what are the tools and knowledge that are necessary so that, that publishing could be unlocked for everyone. So we needed to provide access to the printing press. It needed to be free. That was always very important to us from the beginning. If our service wasn't free, then it would not be accessible to every writer in the world. So it needed to be free. We needed to unlock the printing press. We did that with ebooks, making a virtual printing press that we put in the cloud, made it available to everyone. We provided tools that automated the conversion and production of ebooks. We recognized that, in order to publish like a professional publisher, you need to understand the best practices of professional publishing. So, you look at, our marketing over the last, 18 years, it's always around what are the best practices, sharing best practices, helping writers, think and act like a professional publisher. And then, a year into the business, we realized that you can't really sell a book unless that book is in a bookstore where readers go to buy books.
Right.
And so it took us about a year to figure that out. And so, the second year of Smashwords in 2009, we made the crazy idea to become we wanted to become the Ingram of ebook distribution, because at the time, self-published authors could not distribute their ebooks to the major retailers. You needed a distributor to do that. So we thought we'd fill that role and become the distributor. And to my delight, the major retailers were all eager to carry these books, not just some of the books, but all of the books. And once self-published authors had their books on the virtual shelves of these bookstores, side by side with the traditionally published books, they started selling. And authors started making money. Authors started hitting the bestseller lists. And as these authors became successful, it inspired fellow writers and inspired the industry to recognize that you could self-publish with pride, professionalism, and commercial success. You could publish with respect. And so, I got to hand it to the writers. I told the writers, I believe in you, and the writers believed in themselves, and they did the heavy lifting. They're the ones that did all the work, that had the guts to put their books out as self-published authors, understanding all that tremendous stigma at the time. But they believed in themselves, and they believed in their readers, and the readers believed in them, and magic was created.
Right. Because I know my wife was an early reader of ebooks, and her, like most other readers, don't really know who the publisher of a book is. I mean, they know if it's a good book or a bad book, and they don't know if it's published by Simon and Schuster or Mark Coker. I mean, so, to kind of take away that, kind of veil that people inside publishing placed a lot of value on, but maybe not so much outside. I mean, obviously, the physical retailers did. They had to have a reputation, but readers really did. And I think, again, you're seeing that more and more happening, in that authors are really have taken control of their careers and are making a lot of important decisions.
And one of the neat epiphanies that I've had, over the course of this adventure, is really coming to understand that self-publishing and the self-publishing revolution, it's not just about providing access to the printing press. It's about creating a book experience for readers that is superior for the readers. Because if you think about it, when you give total publishing control to the author, when they're in control of their production, what they write, how they write it, what they produce, the cover design, the release schedule, the distribution, the pricing, the promotions. When you give the author control over all of these things are such important levers in determining customer satisfaction, sure, reader satisfaction. And I think what we get when you self-publish books is you've got authors who are able to service and serve their readers in ways that traditional publishers cannot.
Right. And can go into new territories. I mean, romantasy is the hottest thing in publishing right now. And a lot of its roots do come from self-published authors. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And we've seen houses like Source Books, Dominique Rocca, who was an independent publisher herself, and recently has really tapped into what's happening in the self-publishing world, and is taking on some authors who have only published in digital format and put it in print, and she's had huge numbers of bestsellers.
Yeah. Well, I think, when we look to the future here, the next 5-10 years, I think the next great opportunity is for the indie community and the traditional community to start working together more closely. There's been very little collaboration over the last 15,
Ever.
17 years. But I see a lot of opportunity. If we look at what we think of as publishing as a service, and think of it as a services spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you've got self-published authors, DIY, and on the other end, you've got full-service traditional publishers. Full-service traditional publishers do everything for the author. DIY, you do everything yourself. There's an opportunity to start meeting in the middle, to think of publishing services as a spectrum of services. There's an opportunity. See right now, today, traditional publishers, one problem with their business model is that they're forced to practice a culture of no. They have to reject, between publishers and the agent community, 97.5% of authors are not going to sell their first book to a publisher because they're so discerning in their curation. But imagine if a publisher could say yes to every author. Imagine if a publisher could engage with every author, invest in every author. And I think that's what we've shown with our extreme version of our business model, is that, by making everything free and accessible, by making our services in the cloud and self-serve, we're able to invest in every writer in the world.
Right. Sure. Yeah. No. Yeah.
And so, publishers could do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'd like to see the world move in that direction, because I think traditional publishing is great. I think self-publishing is great. And I think all those little options in the middle can also be really great. The key thing is it's the author's choice. The author's in control. They decide how their book is going to make it to market.
Right. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of independent publishers this year, and they really think, now is a great time for innovation, because, traditional publishing is sort of stalled. And like, we mentioned before, they're depending more and more on books that were originally self-published. So maybe there is some ways that this entire industry actually could work better together.
Yeah, I look forward to that day, and I hope that we can be part of that next level of transformation, because in many senses, self-publishing is already traditional publishing, especially in certain genres. Indie authors dominate romance today, to the point that many traditional publishers just don't want to invest in that the way they used to, because I remember one big publisher telling me a few years ago, back when there was still BEA, that they can't make a business selling 99-cent and $1.99 ebooks.
I heard those same stories too.
Yeah.
So, right. So look what you've brought here, Mark. Why are we giving you an award? You upended the whole thing. No, seriously. Again, you're truly one of the pioneers in independent publishing and self-publishing, and freeing up authors to be able to write what they want and, get it on shelves, be it, online or in a physical retailer.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you to BookFest, and thank you to every self-published author who believed in themselves. Thank you to all of our partners, all the major retailers that have invested so heavily in supporting self-published authors. Thank you to them. This revolution couldn't have happened without them. Thank you to all the Smashwords and Drafted Digital employees. They're the ones that do the heavy work. I, just came up with the ideas. And Jim, again, thank you to you. That at a time when self-publishing was characterized by so much stigma, 17, 18 years ago when we first met, you gave me the time of day. You showed respect, and you always have, to self-published authors and to indie authors. You recognize that we're part of the wonderful tapestry of publishing.
Right.
And so I thank you for that as well. It's such an honor that you're giving this award.
It's very kind of you, and I was flattered that you should ask, because you were always my go-to guy when I had a question about self-publishing and independent publishing. So it was a good team there, Mark.
Well, we'll keep it going.
Okay, you got a deal.
All right. Thanks.